Games Workshop and Warhammer are in the headlines, and not for good reasons. There is a boycott that has started over the addition of female Adeptus Custodes. Not only did Games Workshop add female Adeptus Custodes, but they also lied about the female Adeptus Custodes, claiming they've always been there, despite numerous Adeptus Custodes codexes and other lore, noting that it was an all-male organization. Joining me to talk about this subject is Ember War novelist Richard Fox, who's also a diehard Warhammer fan. So let's welcome Richard Fox to the Trent Report.
John, thanks for having me on. Real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I know that you are a huge Warhammer fan. I know that you're also a novelist. Obviously, you have your Ember War stuff, which I think is probably highly inspired by Warhammer. Obviously, doing some intergalactic space marines and fighting aliens and things like that. So I guess before we kind of get into all of this controversy, all this stuff that is happening, kind of give me a brief background on how you got into Warhammer and what you love about Warhammer.
Sure. The first time I ever saw Warhammer, I was at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I was in the history building down in, they have the little kind of a codex room where they keep old papers. And I was walking past one of the little study rooms, and I saw a war game happening. I backtracked and looked around. I'm like, what's this? This looks interesting. And I saw two people having a game of Warhammer. It was probably second edition. I'm that old. And I saw these people playing Warhammer. I'm like, well, this is really interesting. And then after I graduated, I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I heard one of the guys saying that they were interested in Warhammer. I said, take me to the store. I went to the store and I bought my first Space Marines back in 2001. And so then I painted up some Dark Angels, my own color scheme, played a couple games, had a lot of fun with it. And I just kept, being into the lore, even back in 2003, before there was even a real concerted effort from the Black Library or Games Workshop to really expand the game beyond just the tabletop miniatures. And I was there when the first couple of books came out. I read the Eisenhorn trilogy when it was first published, loved it. And I've been a giant fan of Dan Abnett ever since. And I've collected Dark Angels. I have collected... I'm working on a very large army of Death Watch, and I just finished my Corvus Black Star for my Death Watch. I think this came out pretty well, and I have a giant pile of shame, as we call it. And here's one of my unpainted Death Watch Terminators that I went through the additional trouble of giving him a proper Death Watch shield and shoulder pad. So. Thank God I'm married now, because if I was saying this stuff now, there's just no chance. But I'm married, I have kids, so I'm ready to embrace the hobby fully. But no, I've read lots of the books. I've had interviews with Dan Abnett, who is an amazing author, and I do have one short story that has been optioned by the Black Library, which handles a lot of the novels and whatnot for Games Workshop. And just let me say right now, everything I say, I'm saying only as me. Richard Fox, not as any sort of authority or mouthpiece for Games Workshop or the Black Library. Everything I'm saying is just me.
So let's get into this here. We have these excerpts from the upcoming Codex Adeptus Custodes. It's the 10th edition that's supposed to arrive, I think, on April 27th. So in about 10 days here. And this excerpt reads, Custodian Calidis Torvalia Kesh, I hope I'm saying that right, stood upon the bridge of a Cobra-class destroyer named Vigilant Flame. The warship belonged to the mighty Battlefleet Solar. She lingered in the shadows at the back of the bridge, positioned at a spot where she could observe the actions of every crew member, be they in the instrumentation pits, at the armament shrines, or, in the case of Shipmaster Lethwick, stood ramrod straight before his command throne. So obviously noting that this custodian is a woman. And then we have this other excerpt here too that says, Kesh was warned before anyone else aboard, sensing a sudden empiric energy spike, coupled with the surge of overpressure and sharp temperature drop that presaged a teleport strike. Her guardian spear was leveled and armed before the first cry of alarm or howl of a klaxon rang through the bridge. So obviously there, given the fact, from what I understand, given the fact that she's wielding a guardian spear, she is indeed an Adeptus Custodes. And then the official Warhammer account made it very clear that this was indeed a female Adeptus Custodes. And I think they posted this numerous times. This is probably the most popular one, though, on April 14th. Since the first of the 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians. So I guess I just want to get your reaction here. What do you make of the retcon? First off, what do you make of it?
Well, if somebody says, since the first of the 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians, I would just say, name one. And that would probably end the argument right there, is if there's always been one. Because the lore for Games Workshop is very expansive. It's been around for decades and it keeps getting added and added. And for someone to say, oh, there's always been female custodians, it doesn't pass the smell test, as we used to say in the Army. But I think just how they introduced female custodes was a little ham-handed. And I think if instead of that story in the Adeptus Custodes Codex that's coming up, if there had been a story where you had some custodians visit the Sisters of Silence, and I'm just, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just stop me, I'll explain it. If you had some custodians go into a Sisters of Silence facility and say, we're taking that female child, and then that child says, what's going to happen to me? And those custodians had just said, by his will alone, you will be made into one of us. There. Now it's new. Now it's interesting. And now it's works for the lore to introduce female custodians. Had it been handled just like that, and I thought this up when I was in the kitchen. It was like, how could this have been done better? Now you have an introduction to female custodians that makes sense and is from the will of the Emperor, which is how the custodians do everything. Had it been done like that, there really wouldn't have been any sort of controversy. It could have been done in a way that was both respectful to the lore and, makes perfect sense. And that also explains why we don't have any female custodians models. So for them to just kind of say, oh, no, now it's here. It's kind of like, what? Insert all the memes that you want for people just not believing that when they hear it. So
you would have been, you're totally fine with them actually introducing a female Adeptus Custodes, despite them repeatedly saying in like the 7th, 8th edition of the Codex, Adeptus Codex, that they're men. They've always been the sons of the elite. That would be fine if they had actually written in kind of some kind of background lore to it, where like you were saying, you're fine with that.
Just said here, now they're new, and it's going to be done in the way of the Emperor, and it's for a Sister of Silence, or who are blanks and have no presence in the warp, to be made into a Custodes makes better sense, and could have done that way. And if you just done it someplace new and someplace it's consistent, everyone would have been happy. But instead, it's just kind of like, oh no, it's this way. Come on.
So those old codexes would still be accurate, because that is how the Adeptus Custodes would be. This would just be a new edict from the Emperor, right, adding into his Adeptus Custodes. Okay. Yeah, I like that a lot. So your issue then is the way that they are saying they've always been that way.
Yeah. And then there's kind of a similar change to the lore recently, where Space Marines now have the new Primaris Space Marines. And why are there Primaris Space Marines? Because Games Workshop wanted us to buy more models. Okay. And then they gave us this really decent lore explanation for why there are new Space Marines. And the new models are cool, fun to play with, and fun to paint. So it's kind of like, okay, we all like it. We know that you just want us to buy more models. Fine. You have a business. Everyone with Space Marines Army has huge armies. Now we have to buy new models, but the new models are cool and interesting and fun to paint. So no one's complaining too badly. Does it suck to have your old models no longer useful on the tabletop? Yes. But can you still kind of proxy them in? And if somebody's giving you crap about using your old Space Marine models as Primaris, are they kind of jerks for doing that? Yes. Then you're probably not going to play with that guy. So, but there's ways, it could have been done so much better, and that did not invalidate the old lore. And if you say, here's the new stuff, it's new and interesting, and here's why, and people have been like, yeah, give me more of that. But instead, we get it's like the what reaction instead.
So there are numerous people that have said they are now boycotting Games Workshop over this change. Obviously, I have a number of examples here of this guy, Brother Grimm. He says, not another penny. He canceled his Warhammer Plus subscription. And then he explained that Games Workshop disrespected their lore by changing decades of lore of the Custodes, only taking males from the highborn families of Terra to become Custodes. To now, women can be Custodes now too, and they've totally always been a thing since the beginning, which we just kind of went over. And then he points to this basically being done because of ESG money from BlackRock and Vanguard. We do know that BlackRock and Vanguard do own significant portions of Games Workshop. It's around 11% combined of the shares there. Do you think that was influenced this decision here to make these Adeptus Custodes female?
That explanation makes the most sense. And it also makes the most sense that somebody said, just make this, we want more of this. And then somebody was like, okay. And in the Army, we used to call that fat fingering, where you just do the absolute minimum amount of effort to make the boss happy. And if somebody said, yeah, Games Workshop fat fingers female custodians to make BlackRock happy, I mean, that makes sense. Occam's razor applies.
All right, and then so obviously there's other people here boycotting as well. You got this guy Velrenar right there with you. I don't think I'll buy anything else from Games Workshop. And obviously there's lots of other examples, people canceling other Games Workshop subscriptions that they have and saying that they will no longer be purchasing anything from Games Workshop. So what do you make of this reaction to this change, to obviously changing the Adeptus Custodes into females, and then obviously gaslighting people about them always being female, or they're always being females? Do you think that this is what are your thoughts on this boycott?
Everyone's reaction to do that is, that is entirely their decision, and it's not a bad one, because if people look and say, oh my gosh, the thing I love is getting ruined, and it doesn't seem like it was done with any sort of grace or care for the audience, and then thanks to the free market, they are well within their rights to go wherever else they want to spend their time and money. And I think Games Workshop did kind of step in it a bit here with this change and how it was handled. And ultimately, it's the free market is what you have to respect, and you have to respect people's time and effort that they put into a hobby. And when you make a big change like this, and it just rubs people the wrong way. And like there was not too long ago, Games Workshop and Black Library tried to have a book series meant for the young adult audience. And if there's ever an IP not meant for the young adult or child audience, it's the Black Library, because Slanesh is a torture orgy demon, and then there's servitors. And if I ever wanted my kids to you get into the lore, I would wait till they're older, because I don't want to have to explain a torture orgy demon or a servitor to a 10-year-old. It's just not something that's right for kids. So Games Workshop, and they've since stopped with these lines of books, mostly probably because of sales, and also because it's like, this is not what we should be doing as a company, where our audience needs to be like at least the 15 and up sort of area. But it's and also the Games Works, the new Custodes Codex, no one's really excited about it. No one's really excited to go buy new models and go play this. They're excited for the new Orc Codex, which was very much in tune with the lore theme and how orcs are in the setting. So everyone's excited about that, because all of the options you had to play for orcs are thematically and lore correct. And then you look at Custodes, and now it's like, not only do these new rules kind of suck, but now there's girls in it, and it's kind of like, so people are backing away. They're going to go find something more interesting to do. And I think it's a misstep for the company to do this. I don't know. It's just weird how they can have like one codex that's really great and people love it, and it makes perfect sense within the lore, and everyone's excited. And then you got the same one coming out the same week, and it's like, who did this? It's a little internally inconsistent. I don't know how it happens.
So I think that begs the question. You obviously pointed to how they had this young adult line, and they obviously scrapped it and are no longer doing it anymore. Do you think that this is something that they potentially might backtrack on and realize that they've made a massive mistake? Or do you think that they kind of move forward and double down on what they're doing, or potentially maybe do something like you were suggesting, where they actually try and introduce this kind of new lore that would make sense?
I think if they go forward and try to make some new lore that's consistent with what we already know, then that would be great. And because Games Workshop is very capable of sticking to their lore and doing it excellently. There is the Horus Heresy, which has just concluded a very, very long book series that's been running for decades, and it would run very, very smoothly. Like the final 3 books of the Horus Heresy are just absolutely phenomenal. It's a story people have been waiting for decades, and Dan Abnett and the Black Library team nailed it on how this story played out. I mean, not everyone's happy, but no one will ever be happy. That's just the way the world is. But the End and the Death series, brilliant. So Games Workshop knows how to do it. It just sometimes it seems like left-handed Games Workshop and right-handed Game Workshop, they're off doing other things. And then after a while, they both had to figure out what they did and fix it. So I believe Games Workshop could fix this and then just say that, oh, hey, that one post about the Adeptus Custodes have always been part of the 10,000. Aha! It was Tzeentch. It was the demons and the machines. It was Grotz. And then they can backtrack and fix it. They've backtracked and fixed things before. It's entirely possible for them to do that again. And then just the way the lore is, there's room for them to say, oh, it was demons, and fix it. And then everyone will go, yeah, it was demons. And then we'll move on and enjoy playing with our little plastic men. So,
but what do you think they will do, though?
I think they'll go forward with female Custodes, and I think they, hopefully somebody there is like, hey, this wasn't great. Let's fix it, and then introduce it in a way that the audience will be happy with. And then they'll look at that one post from one staffer who may not have, who I don't know where he got the marching orders to do that, but they'll come back and say, no, they weren't there the whole time.
I will point out, so it's not just one post. I mean, they were replying with that kind of same phrase to like multiple people. So I don't, it looked like it was a company initiative for sure, or instructions.
Yeah,
so.
they can backtrack and handle it better, and I hope they do. So,
all right. So we do also have, you're talking about the lore and how they've done a really good job with Horus Heresy. We do have some comments from a former employee who I guess worked on their White Dwarf magazine. It looks like he kind of moved up through the ranks here, but he has claimed that that the whole point, he says here, 40K lore is unreliable narration at best. Myth, legend, and contradiction abound throughout the background history. Heck, even through our own history. And he says, and if possible, female Marines, Custodes, and LGBTQ plus reputation make you lose water. That's on you and you alone. That was obviously in response to Mark Kern and him kind of going through this entire thread about how the Adeptus Custodes were always male before. And he went through a lot of the lore and everything like that. But then he followed up with this really, this longer post here. And he kind of talks about, obviously, how he moved up through Games Workshop. He was a mail order troll. And then he made his way into the studio and eventually was working on the White Dwarf magazine for both the UK and the US edition. But this is where right here, he says, you never were supposed to build silos of lore because the very idea of the Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 universe was the history was so convoluted and fragmented, there was no such thing as fact. Everything was supposed to contradict. That was the purpose. Obviously, you say you have an option for a Black Library story. We're talking about the Horus Heresy. You're obviously well versed in the Warhammer lore. I think on this face, this just seems like absurd and ridiculous. But what do you make of this here?
For the lore, there's always kind of a gray area where there's possibilities could exist, and that's what's nice, is that's where your imagination can go. Like for my Death Watch army, there's going to be Loyalist Alpha Legion in it, and there's going to be other Space Marines with the left shoulder pauldron of the Death Watch, but they're not in the Death Watch. It's because they're a Soul Blade fighting Tyranids. And is that absolutely within the lore? No. Is that my idea within the realm of lore, kind of that gray area where I can play with? Yes, that's there. So the lore is such that you can play around with it and have fun. Like there's the 2nd and 11th Primarch who, those were just there so that people can kind of have their imagination go and play in that area. And that's okay. And everyone likes that. So what's nice about the Warhammer lore is that it's 80% correct and 20% is kind of out there, and you can kind of do things as you want with it. And that's really one of the big sort of appeals to the hobby, is you don't have to do it exactly like this. But the thing is, if you have a bunch of blue Marines with Ultramarine symbols and all the Ultramarine gear, and you say, no, these are Chaos Space Marines, people are going to look at you like, no, they're not. Those are obviously Ultramarines. You can't say they're a Chaos Warband. And so, when people see something, they expect it to make sense internally and have an internal bit of consistency. And so you have that with Warhammer, and you have that with the models and the lore, that you can be about 80% correct. And sometimes things will be incorrect and then will get changed later. And that's okay. You don't have to have it like, absolute lockstep along the way. That's not really fun. If you have to play a certain way, you have to paint your models exactly a certain way. That's not fun. But if you can be 80% correct and have 20% of room to play with, that's great. That makes it fun. And so being able to do that is there. Now, to say the entire thing is supposed to be internally inconsistent, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And because then all of a sudden, well, if nothing is lore and nothing is canon, then you have nothing at all. So now now I can just go get Legos and use those for my Space Marines. Like, what? They're Legos Space Marines. The Lord didn't say we can't have Lego Space Marines, so obviously I can have the Lego Space Marines. You can take that down that slippery slope to the absurd part pretty quick. But and I've got my Deathwatch Chorus Blackstar here, and if I painted it up in different colors and said, "Oh, this is a different flyer thing," that might work. Actually, people will be like, "Yeah, it's a cool model. We understand what you did," and they understand that, okay, it's different models now, or you're using a different rule set. It's okay. There's plenty of wiggle room, but it's not meant to just, we're going to have whatever we want at any time. Go. It's kind of like, man, because for the Warhammer lore, there's a lot. And when it comes to Warhammer lore, most people know nothing, or you know entirely too much. And when you're at the point where you know entirely too much, you know what's out there. And if you start throwing in the things that aren't internally consistent, now it's like, what are you doing? Now you have invalidated all the things I know and expect from this lore. And readers and audiences and customers don't really appreciate that, because they it's like if you go into a pizza restaurant and they said, "Oh, now it's hamburgers," and you're like, "What? It says pizza," and like, "Well, it says restaurant too, and you can get hamburgers at restaurants, so now you get hamburgers instead of pizza." And people will be like, I came here for pizza," and then they're not happy.
And they walk out, and
then
we're seeing with the boycott. Right?
Yep.
So I do want to ask, obviously Warhammer is not a mainstream property. I think it's pretty big. I think it's still a niche property. I think they've made huge inroads, especially with video games, and obviously with the Black Library and the novels and things like that. But they are going to be taking their next step with this upcoming Prime Video series. And they've got Henry Cavill on, who is a massive Warhammer enthusiast. He builds his own armies and everything. It's well documented on his Instagram too. So, he does Custodes too.
I don't know how Games Workshop could do this to my Henry.
I didn't realize that. That's wow. That's maybe that's why they do. Maybe that's why. Because there does seem to be some animus towards Henry. We've seen people talking about how he was difficult on set for The Witcher, but that seems to have been standards. He does. That's been rebuffed a lot, because it was just like he's just wanting to stay true to the lore. He's coming up with suggestions from the actual books on how to improve scenes and things like that. So given the fact that I think this is an even more interesting question now, because Henry is a Custodes player. How do you think kind of this change could affect what they're doing with the Prime Video series? And obviously we talked about BlackRock and Vanguard's influence, but do you think this could also be something that is being influenced by Amazon MGM Studios, Prime Video? Because we know they also have a lot of these DEI policies, because they are also being influenced by BlackRock and Vanguard and other major like investment firms that push a lot of this stuff. So just kind of give me your thoughts on like, how do you see this affecting the Prime Video series?
Well, up until 3 days ago, Games Workshop always had a very, very tight leash on its lore and how its IP is used. You would like if you see they have these toys which are like larger versions of the miniatures, and somehow cost less sometimes, and they look exactly like the miniatures. And if you look at the video games that have ever been optioned, they are exceedingly close to the miniatures and the lore. So Games Workshop is very locked down on, you will do it this way or you will not do it at all. And I really appreciate that, because when it's like, oh, I'm going to pick up a Warhammer game, I know exactly what I'm getting into. I've gone into my pizza restaurant and I'm ordering pizza, and I love pizza. So that's great. But as far as, and Henry Cavill loves the lore for Warhammer, and he is an absolute stickler for it, and I really appreciate that. And if he's going to be producing this Games Workshop, this Amazon series for Games Workshop, I'm expecting it to be very, very close to the lore I already know and am expecting. And if Henry Cavill comes out and the show has male and female orcs, working together, it's gonna be like, what is happening? There are no female orcs. There are no male orcs either, but that's a different discussion. So I'm anticipating that the show is going to be very close and very true to the lore. So, and there's so much wiggle room for all the diversity you could want in the show is perfectly explainable within the lore. Not female custodes for the last 10,000 years. That doesn't make sense. That is not lore consistent. But I think when we get to the show with Amazon and Henry Cavill in it, I still think it's going to be true to the lore, which is what the audience expects. And I don't know why Amazon would spend all this money to option the rights for Warhammer and then not give us Warhammer like they did with Amazon Prime with the
Wheel of Time, Rings of Power.
Yeah, I mean, like that's not Lord of the Rings. It's not consistent with what we know for the show and the lore. I don't understand why they would spend all this money for the IP and then not use the IP. It's kind of like, did you just like burning money? What is going on here?
They did it though, right? They've done it with Wheel of Time. They've done it with Rings of Power. So we have seen them do that. And well, Halo's not necessarily Amazon, that's Paramount. But yeah, we see them do this all the time, right? It's all these Hollywood studios kind of do this stuff. We're seeing them doing it with Marvel and DC as well, obviously with Warner Brothers and the Walt Disney Company. So kind of last question here to wrap it up. You obviously had high praise for the Horus Heresy. Do you think that people should continue, or do you think that people should boycott this? And if not, what do you think the proper response should be?
It's everyone out there has the absolute right to like what they like. And if you don't like the female Custodes, ignore it and mock it. But for calling for boycotts, I don't know. But I mean, businesses eventually, I used to think that a business will eventually get the hint, but Disney keeps proving me wrong over and over again. So, for everyone out there, if you don't like the female Custodes, you don't have to play with them. You don't even have to acknowledge them. And if somebody has a female Custodes, you can start all of your if the Emperor had text-to-speech device jokes and just go with it. I'm not going to boycott anything. I don't plan on buying any more models just because my pile of shame is enormous and I really need to finish painting the models I've already got. And so I've never been attracted to doing a Custodes army anyway. But, for folks out there, if you're not happy, tell Games Workshop you're not happy. That eventually one would hope they're going to get the message. But I don't have any plans. I'm not boycotting anything, and I'm going to keep enjoying the stories. And I just would hope that maybe Games Workshop will go, hey, you know what? We didn't handle that quite right. Let's do this a little bit better and introduce female Custodes in a way that's one, neat, interesting, and cool. And then I think people will appreciate that. So, and whenever there's a change to lore, if it's done in a way that's neat, interesting, and cool, and consistent with what could be possible, by and large, people are fine with that. So I think Games Workshop could just take a step back and do this again with once again, but there's a famous German World War II military pamphlet called Ausfahrt aber mit Fräulein, which means forward but with intelligence. So Games Workshop could go forward but with a little bit more intelligence here.
And obviously, you have your Ember War series. There's a number of books in that series. I mean, you've got a number of spinoffs too. I'm looking at the Terran Strike Marines, Terran Armor Corps. You've got the Exiled Fleet as well, Terra Nova. So obviously, you have a ton of stuff that is kind of an alternative that you have. Where would you suggest someone start with that if they are unfamiliar with your Ember War stuff?
I say just start with the Ember War. If you've got Amazon, the Kindle Prime reading, you can read almost everything I got for free. I say start with the Ember War if you like big robots punching aliens. I'd say read the Exile Fleet with Albion Lost if you want more politics and more kind of a desperate situation for your heroes. And then if you like first contact stories done a little different, read the TYR. And the audiobooks the first 2 audiobooks are narrated by R.C. Bray. And so there's lots of stuff out there for you to take a look at. And then I've also got the Weapon series coming up next month, which is set a little more closer to present times. But if you like the idea of cyborg soldiers who end up having a lot of problems with their chain of command and what made them cyborgs, then the Weapon would be a great series for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and discussing Warhammer 40K here with me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.